when I see, for instance, writers say, oh, well, such and such a quarterback had a bad day. He was 8 for 14, so he had a bad day. That's irrelevant. Coaches don't even think like that about the performance of a player or a team. They're looking at specific things which beat writers and fans don't know about.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday. And if I have even a little extra pep in my step this morning, it's because I'm back. We're back. Eagles, Bengals tonight, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be game one of, at least 25 that I will be a color commentator for this season. Very much looking forward to it. One of my favorite things in life to do. Never take it for granted. Extremely excited about that. Plus, we recorded a couple of shows last night in front of a live audience at Soul Joel's in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. That was really cool too, right? To record my season preview and predictions in front of a bunch of listeners and fans. That's always a thrill as well. So I'm even a little bit more fired up than I already am on a Thursday, a teaching tutorial Thursday, when we have the great Greg Cosell in the house. There's a number of players in the news that I want to get to with Greg. And I also want to have, I think, a very productive, constructive, healthy conversation as it relates to preseason football, what it is and what it isn't. There is some news, especially with Matthew Stafford, to get to a little bit later in the show. I think I have some winners for you guys to announce. Those of you that go the extra mile, whether you rate and review the show and send it to me, ross@rosstucker.com, or you engage on social media at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod, or take advantage of any of the awesome sponsors that you hear on the show. But first, let's dive into preseason football and some of the guys in the news with my guy, Greg Cosell. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Okay, so Greg, first of all, everybody needs to check him out on social media at Greg Cosell, because he's the man. 45 plus years at NFL Films, breaking down the tape. Was at Titans training camp all week last week. And it's funny, Greg, because I want to ask you about Trey Lance, because he looked really good in the Hall of Fame game last week, which we'll go back and forth on. But the thing I say, Greg, is on the one hand, take preseason football with a grain of salt as it relates to team performance, scheme, the plays they run. However, the players out there are still trying to perform their best. So if a guy makes a great play, that's a good sign. If a guy makes a terrible play, that's not a good sign. But I wanted to have a healthy conversation, Greg, with you about what preseason football really is and what it isn't, because I think that'll really help our listeners over the next 3 weeks.
Well, I think, Ross, it really starts with the practices, not just the games. Because every team, as you know, deals with practices and the games differently. I've been fortunate. I was in Tennessee, but I've been to other training camps throughout my career. And what a lot of fans don't know is what the coaching staff wants to get done with specific players, with specific units, how they go about structuring a practice. So when I see, for instance, writers say, oh, well, such and such a quarterback had a bad day. He was 8 for 14, so he had a bad day. That's irrelevant. Coaches don't even think like that about the performance of a player or a team. They're looking at specific things which beat writers and fans don't know about. So training camp in and of itself is really a day-to-day thing with specific things being focused on, being coached, and that's how they go about it. Now, you're 100% right. You want to see players perform better than worse, obviously, but very often what coaches do in training camp is they put players, particularly younger players, in intentionally difficult situations.
It's a terrific point.
Because the last thing you want to have happen, Ross, and you know this, you were through it how many years? 7, 8 years in the league,
7,
right?
yeah.
You know that you don't want to find out about a player how he deals with a difficult situation week 1 or week 3 or week 4. That's not when you want to find out. I mean, I've had coaches tell me that with a young quarterback, we want him to fail in training camp because failing leads to learning. You don't want him to fail week 3. You want him to fail in training camp because that's how you develop teaching and coaching points. And also, one thing that teams do in training camp, and this is really helpful for both sides of the ball, is what they call unscripted periods, which they treat like a game. So the defense doesn't know what the offense is calling in 7-on-7 or 11-on-11, if it's padded, and the defense, the offense doesn't know what the defense is calling. All this is done intentionally. So very often they're looking for players to fail in the sense that, hey, we have things to work on. And it's very much true in preseason games as well. It all depends on what each specific team is looking to get accomplished. So I know for someone like me, and I'm just being honest, it's very difficult to evaluate these games in any way other than, a guy looked good because he executed what he was asked to execute. But in terms of what that means for when you're playing a game week 1 or week 5 or week 6, I'm not sure how much you can extrapolate from that.
Well, there's so many different levels to this.
Yeah.
I think I saw where Brian Schottenheimer, the head coach for the Cowboys, said, after the joint practices, he said, "Hey guys, we kept a lot of clubs in our bag. We're really just playing out there with a 7-iron, and we're going to play with a 7-iron throughout the preseason." And for those of you that aren't into golf or don't understand the analogy, what he's saying is that they're really, and this is pretty much across the board, they're really being, pretty basic with what they're doing and what they're asking of guys in certain situations, especially I would say preseason games. If they have new wrinkles, if they have new schemes, they don't want to show that in the preseason. I mean, they want to save their best stuff for the regular season. So the preseason really becomes about having these guys just run the basic plays. I will say this, Greg, having played for a bunch of different teams, if you've lost your first couple preseason games and haven't looked good, sometimes the coaches will game plan more for that third one because they don't want to go into the regular season, without any optimism or kind of pep in our step for the fans and for the players. So they might actually game plan more for that one. Meanwhile, the team you're playing against, they might have gone 2-0 in the preseason at that point, and they might not game plan at all. What you do know is in the regular season, every team is game planning to the extreme and doing everything they can to win that game. In the preseason, they could be looking for a specific thing.
Correct.
They could want to see, they could want to feature a guy because they want to try to trade him. I mean, there's a myriad of things that could be going on.
Right. And since we don't know any of those things, I always find it interesting that people make comments that they really don't know anything about. And that's the thing that always gets me about preseason. For someone like myself who loves the tactics and the strategic dimensions of the game, preseason, I watch it because it's football, but I don't know what to take away from it because I don't know what is being asked to work on, both in training camp and in the games. I mean, you're doing the Eagles game and, Zach Taylor apparently said Joe Burrow is going to play the first quarter. Now that could be 6 plays. It could be 12 plays. Who knows what the number of plays is? Does this mean anything? Are we going to evaluate Joe Burrow differently based on what he does? Of course not. Now, it's obviously different for young players. When you put a young player out there, you want them to succeed and execute what they're being asked to execute, not fail at what they're being asked to execute. But on the other hand, depending on how he's done all through training camp, it might be a learning situation. You might say, hey, you were going up against such and such, and we really wanted to see how you did against him, and now we have something to teach you. You just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and I'll even take it with my preparation, right? So For the Eagles, they have a couple guys battling for the third-string quarterback, Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Kyle McCord. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Greg, has been fantastic in preseason the last couple of years. He's really been outstanding. And then when he's gotten into the regular season and more things have been thrown at him, he has not fared as well, And we've seen other guys over the years in that same scenario and situation where they look great in the preseason, but the regular season, when they're being game planned more and they're going against, better players, better defenses, they don't fare as well. And that's part of it.
With quarterbacks, Ross, the thing that every coach wants to do this, and in preseason it's relatively easy, is you want the quarterback to be able to throw to his primary read, the first look. And that happens in the preseason a lot. And a lot of quarterbacks can look good, but then when you get into the games, and it's not so easy just to throw it to your primary read for obvious reasons that you just hit upon a couple of them, and there's several more, then it's not so easy, and all of a sudden players don't look so good. So, with quarterbacks, it's so hard to make any kind of meaningful evaluation for a young quarterback in the preseason.
Right. The other thing, Greg, is sometimes with a young quarterback, they just want to get that young man some confidence.
Correct.
So they want ball out quick, primary read. I don't think a lot of times in the preseason games they want to put those guys in a bad spot.
No, they want completion.
Young guys, they don't want to hurt their confidence. If they're going to put them in a tough scenario or situation, it's going to be in a camp practice. In the game, they really want those guys to look good for a lot of different reasons, but primarily their confidence.
And then it depends on the player. If the player is by nature, a really confident guy, and they may say, what, we're going to put you in a couple of tough situations, and we want to see how it goes. And if he doesn't convert, then they have something to teach. It always depends on the player. But you're right. A lot of times with a young quarterback, they just want completions because they don't want the young quarterback to come out of the game going 2 for 8. They'd rather him go 6 for 8, even if he throws for 29 yards, because at least he completed passes.
The one thing I don't like is when people say preseason games don't matter. I can assure you, for like the starting jobs that are up for grabs for the Eagles, for example, safety next to Blankenship, corner across from Quinyon Mitchell, I can assure you these games matter. Like those guys and how they perform, the guys battling, that matters. The score doesn't matter. How the team plays doesn't matter, but how individual players perform. If guys like Ringo and Adoree Jackson play for the Eagles, they're the ones competing for that job opposite Mitchell. If the Bengals really do play Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, that's fantastic work, Greg, for those guys. And how they perform against star receivers like that, I can promise that'll matter. How does it not matter that they're trying to make a decision about these guys?
But as you know, Ross, and all this matters, no question. Every snap matters. That's just the nature of life in the NFL. But, the 12 practices, I'm just throwing out a number, prior to tonight's preseason game, ultimately matter a lot more because there's a lot more snaps and plays that the coaching staff's evaluating.
So again, just to wrap up here, when you're watching the preseason games, okay, remember, some guys are being set up for success. Some guys, maybe their coaches are putting them in intentionally uncomfortable situations. Some guys, they just want to see in specific situations.
Yep.
Other times, they want to spotlight certain players, either to trade them or just to see what they have. See what they've got in them, and to see if they're a guy that they want to keep on the team or whatever. So there's a myriad of reasons why the teams do what they do in these preseason games. So enjoy them. Watch them, especially watch the players, but just take it a little bit with a grain of salt. And I guess all that being said, Greg, it was encouraging to see Trey Lance play the way he did for the Chargers. It's his third team, and man, that would be a real feather in Jim Harbaugh's cap if he can get Lance to be a solid NFL player. I think maybe most people have given up hope on a starter, but heck, if Trey Lance can just be a good number 2, then Jim Harbaugh's accomplished something.
Yeah, and that game was a classic case. I ran through Trey Lance's plays, and it was all first read stuff. And he made a couple of really good throws, which no knock on Trey Lance, but the nature of those throws were such that a high school kid could make those throws. They were first read throws. He made one great fade ball throw to Lambert Smith. By the way, a player whose tape I really, really like coming out of Auburn. People might remember him at Penn State, and he transferred to Auburn, and he's fast, and I liked his tape. I thought he was a better prospect than where he was drafted, which I believe was in the 5th round. But it was, there was a lot of boot action, which of course splits the field in half, and it was a lot of, he was able to throw to his first read. Now, we know if he were to get a chance to play in games, real games, it's not going to play out that way. So, again, a great example of he had success, which you'd prefer to see. You obviously didn't want him to miss throws that are clean and that are there. As I said, that fade ball to Lambert Smith was a beautifully thrown ball. But I don't know how much you take away from whether that shows improvement in Trey Lance, other than the fact that he executed first read throws at a high level.
It's an awesome point. And listen, here's my takeaway from that, Greg. If he didn't execute first read throws, now we got a real problem.
Correct. Correct.
But that's a great point. All right. I want to stick with the Chargers, actually, because they're in the news this week, re-signing longtime wide receiver Keenan Allen. Obviously, he's had a lot of success with Justin Herbert. They had a surprise retirement with Mike Williams, another former Charger that came back to the squad this year in the offseason, right before camp. So they bring Keenan Allen back. And I know you watched him last year in Chicago, Greg. I guess question one is, what does Keenan Allen still have at this stage of his career? And maybe for people that need a refresher course, what's he kind of always been?
Yeah, he was a terrific receiver. Obviously he's not the same guy he was. He was never a burner. He had a great feel for winning, finding soft spots and voids in zone. He had a great feel for separating at the top of his route stem because he wasn't a dynamic athlete, but it's that separation which goes beyond just athletic ability. At this point in his career, he's even lost a step, and he really didn't have a step to lose. He becomes kind of a specific kind of player. You use him because he understands how to play. Like I said, he understands how to work against zone. He becomes more of a security blanket type receiver, and obviously they're looking for receivers. We'll see. I always struggle with guys who are later in their career, Ross, because it's hard to know exactly what he has left, given that he's now going to have to go through, a training camp, and they picked him up after training camp started. So that's hard to know. A guy like that, he could be of huge help, or he could be cut in the final cuts. It's hard to know that right now. But he was a terrific receiver with a great understanding of how to play the position, a super high-level understanding of that, and a fun guy to watch just because he always seemed to be open in those third down situations.
I'm curious about this, Greg. I've always looked at him as more of a slot guy.
That's kind of what he is.
And they have Ladd McConkey. So yeah. Talk to me about, versatility for wide receivers to play outside or inside, and the potential to have two guys that are more slot type guys. Because listen, there were plenty of years where the Patriots had like Edelman and Amendola.
Right.
That you can play that way.
Yeah, I think that delineation has sort of changed a bit over time in the league. We had this conversation when the Seahawks signed Cooper Kupp, and a lot of people said, "Oh, what are they doing? They have, Smith-Njigba." Well, the game has changed in that teams now with a lot of reduced splits, with a ton of motion, more motion in the league than ever before. That strict delineation that, he's a slot guy, that doesn't necessarily exist. Now, there are receivers who are pure slots, and that makes it hard for teams to really keep them, and unless it's dependent on the other receivers that they have. But the fact that Allen is essentially a slot guy at this point, has been most of his career, and that McConkey is sort of that guy as well. I don't know if that's as big a factor as it used to be, just because the game has changed with a lot of formation variation and a lot of shifts in motions. It's just like the right tackle, left tackle delineation to me is not a really big deal anymore because of the nature of NFL pass rushers. So, the game has evolved over time.
I'll give you another one. How about the Bucks drafting Ibuka, even though they have Chris Godwin?
Yeah.
I don't think people look at it or care about that as
No.
much. Let's stay on the West Coast. Kyren Williams got a big contract,
Yep.
Greg. I love this guy. I mean,
Yep.
I was watching a clip of him against Damone Clark in the joint practices, and he pancaked Damone Clark. He's like a textbook example, Greg, of doesn't wow you, but does everything well and coaches love.
A classic sustainer, super hard runner, not going to, run 50 yards for a touchdown, keeps an offense on schedule, excellent blocker, really good receiver, does everything well. Just a true workhorse back. I mean, he carried 316 times last year and did not play in the final game. Now, again, we're not talking about his whole career. We have no idea what's going to happen 4 or 5 years down the road. But, he's one of those guys that he's a grinder, he's a sustainer, a classic case of a guy that when it's blocked for 3 gets 5 or 6. Those few extra yards matter big time over the course of a game. Just a really good football player, but not, everybody talks about running backs, Ross. They say, well, he's not special. Then you have to define special. I mean, I think people think special in terms of guys that can take it to the house. He's not necessarily that guy, but he is a really strong piece of an offense. And
doing all of those things at a high level and being durable, that's a different kind of special.
Correct.
He's a pro. I mean, he's an absolute.
Great point.
You always say like Geno Smith is a professional quarterback. Kyren Williams is a professional running back.
That is, and a lot of people, including myself, were wrong on him when he came out of Notre Dame. What was he, a 5th-round pick, I believe?
Yep.
I mean,
the whole league was wrong on him, Greg. Don't feel bad about it.
No. Hey, Ross, you know me well enough to know if I'm wrong on a guy, I tell you. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, but the whole league, if they knew what he was, he would have gone in the 2nd round.
That's correct.
All right. What about real quick, Greg? James Cook, who's kind of holding in now from the Bills. What about him? I know the Bills like him, but I feel like they think they have other good running backs too.
Didn't he just sign? I thought he signed.
No, I don't believe so.
No.
Unless that was this morning.
Okay. James Cook is obviously a really important piece to their offense. They've made a commitment to try to run the ball more. Look, no team in the league last year lined up with 6 offensive linemen more than the Bills by a wide margin. They clearly want to run the ball. They've got kind of a little bit of a committee backfield because Cook he's not Kyren Williams. You're not going to give Cook the ball 316 times, but he's an explosive player. I mean, he's a guy that can take it to the house. He has a receiving element to his game, and it's not just in terms of check downs or flare passes. He can run routes. So he's an important piece of the way their offense has evolved over the last year or two. I thought I saw he signed. Maybe he didn't, but I imagine they'll get that worked out.
Greg, you are the man. Always appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ross.
All right, let's dive into the news. But first, all right, how many of you have gone to rewards.labattusa.com so far? I've been telling you guys about it for a long time now, and a lot of times, and it's worth it because Labatt Blue and Labatt Blue Light and Labatt Blue Light Lime, all delicious. And no matter where you purchase it, all you have to do is upload the receipt at rewards.labattusa.com. You start to rack up the points. Then you get exclusive merch that can only be found there. Rewards.labattusa.com. A couple years ago, Bob Odenkirk showed up out of nowhere as an action star in Nobody. That movie was a ton of fun, and now he's back in the sequel Nobody 2, hitting theaters on August 15th. Bob returns as Hutch. This time he tries to go on vacation with his family, only for all hell to break loose. It's a real delight to see a guy like Odenkirk kick some serious ass. Nobody 2 is produced by 87 North, the same team behind hits like John Wick, Bullet Train, and The Fall Guy. The film also stars Connie Nielsen, RZA, and the legendary Christopher Lloyd and Sharon Stone. Nobody 2 is a perfect summer movie. You don't want to miss this one. Nobody 2 is only in theaters August 15th.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, we have an update in LA. Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford, he received an epidural for his disc issue that he's been having with his back.
Not good. I have been there and done that. This is now officially concerning, and it makes a lot of sense why Steve Fezzik already bet the under on Stafford's season passing yards on the Even Money podcast before this information came out. I'm sure that line has moved now. You know, quarterback's not like offensive line. I think it's very possible he can play all season through this, but it's still not fun to have a disc issue. Like I said, been there, done that. Dr. Chow, Pro Football Doc, SportsInjuryCentral.com has been all over this. You know, this is something to keep an eye on. My guess is he'll be able to manage it and get through the games, but it could affect his performance for sure.
Panthers corner J.C. Horn, he was in a car accident, but he appears to be fine. And Patriots head coach Mike Vrabel, he got banged up a little bit. He had a bruise on his face breaking up a fight.
That's so Vrabel. He's probably happy that happened because that will be in Patriots fan lore now. If they turn around or have a good season, I can just hear the Patriots fan. It started when he got in, he broke up that fight and he had the cut on his cheek. That's the type of coach I can already hear Patriots fans. It's like the legend begins for Vrabel as the Patriots head coach.
And we got your first game tonight. Bengals, Eagles. How you feeling about it?
Oh, man. Like giddy, excited. Thrilled, by the way, that Zach Taylor, the Bengals head coach, has come out and said that they're going to play their starters for the first quarter. That obviously makes it more interesting. You know, it'll replay on NFL Network at least once or twice. And if you have NFL Plus, you can certainly watch it live as well if you're not in the local coverage area for the Eagles. So fired up about that. Fired up about Bob Thrash. He's the Spread the Word winner via social media, Instagram, and Robert Robertson gets the YouTube shout out. I don't think anybody sent in a sponsor confirmation this week. So those are the two winners, Bob and Robert. Congratulations. Other than that, have an awesome weekend. Watch the football, drink the beer, eat the food. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. You know how I feel about it. I'm a big believer in life and telling people how you feel about them and giving them stories or gifts that commemorate it that are truly unique. Most people that get my front page stories end up crying. So how many gifts have you given a loved one, your mom, your dad, that moved them to tears? Not many. myfrontpagestory.com, backofficescheduler.com, humanheadnyc.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.